All hope was lost as the Vorta refugees drifted through the cold, uncaring void of space, their ships battered and running out of supplies. Months ago, the ruthless Ocampus had obliterated their homeworld, slaughtering millions and leaving only a handful of survivors to flee into the uncharted depths of the galaxy. Aboard the lead ship, Ilara, the young Vorta leader, stared numbly at the flickering readouts, the weight of her people's fate crushing down on her shoulders. The Vorta ships limped onwards, their hulls scarred by battle and corroded by the ceaseless assault of cosmic radiation. Inside, the survivors huddled in the dimly lit holds, their eyes hollow and their bodies wasting away as the last of their food stores dwindled to nothing. Despair hung thick in the recycled air, suffocating and all-consuming. But just as the specter of extinction tightened its grip, a miracle appeared on the long-range sensors. An unknown planet, lush and teeming with life, a shining beacon of hope amidst the darkness. With their last reserves of fuel, the Vorta ships limped towards this mysterious world, praying it would be their salvation. As they approached, a transmission crackled over the comms, not the cold, imperious dictates of the hated Ocampus, but something utterly unexpected, a warm human voice inviting the beleaguered Vorta to land on New Terra, promising aid and shelter. Ilara hesitated, suspicion warring with desperation in her heart. In the end, she had no choice. She gave the order to descend. The Vorta landing ships touched down on a vast landing field. The once verdant valley transformed into a bustling spaceport, alive with strange, wondrous technology, the likes of which the refugees had never seen. Hundreds of humans lined the perimeter, a kaleidoscope of skin tones and attire, their faces alight with welcome and sympathy as the first haggard Vorta staggered down the ramps. As the Vorta refugees were escorted to the temporary shelter, Ilara couldn't help but marvel at the strange, yet wondrous structures that dotted the human settlement. Towering buildings of glass and steel glinted in the warm sunlight, while sleek, wheeled vehicles traversed the smooth paved streets. It was a world unlike anything she had ever seen, a stark contrast to the organic, flowing architecture of her lost homeworld. Administrator Brian Boyd greeted the weary Vorta with a warm smile and an outstretched hand, a gesture that Ilara had learned was a sign of goodwill among humans. "Welcome to New Terra," he said, his voice deep and reassuring. "We've prepared accommodations for you and your people. I know you've been through a great ordeal, but please, make yourselves at home." Ilara nodded, mustering a weak smile as she shook the administrator's hand. "Thank you," she said, her voice husky with exhaustion and emotion. "We are grateful for your hospitality." As the Vorta were led into the shelter, a sprawling complex of prefabricated buildings surrounding a central courtyard, they couldn't help but gawk at the alien amenities that greeted them. Soft, plush beds replaced the hard, unyielding bunks of their ships, while strange, glowing panels illuminated the rooms with a steady, artificial light. In the dining area, long tables were laden with a bewildering array of foods, from crisp, green vegetables to steaming slabs of roasted meat. But despite the comfort and plenty that surrounded them, many of the Vorta remained wary, huddling together in tight-knit groups and casting suspicious glances at the human soldiers who patrolled the perimeter. Ilara could see the tension in their postures, the way they flinched at sudden noises or movements. It was understandable, given the horrors they had endured at the hands of the Ocampus. As the days passed, Ilara worked tirelessly to bridge the gap between her people and their human hosts. She spent long hours with Lieutenant Marcus Wright, the liaison appointed by Administrator Boyd, learning about human customs and technology. She marveled at the ingenuity of their tools, from the handheld communicators that allowed instant communication across vast distances, to the incredible flying machines that could traverse the skies with ease. But even as she immersed herself in the wonders of human society, Ilara couldn't shake the feeling of unease that gnawed at her. She saw the way some of the human colonists looked at her people, with a mixture of pity and resentment. She heard the whispers in the corridors, the mutterings about the strain the refugees were placing on the colony's resources. And then there was Zara, the young Vorta female who had caught the eye of Sergeant Alex Thompson. Ilara watched as the two spent more and more time together, talking and laughing despite the language barrier. She saw the way the elders glared at the pair, their displeasure evident in their stern-lined faces. Ilara knew that the path ahead would be difficult. The Vorta had lost everything, their home, their way of life, their very identity. Integrating into human society would be a long and painful process, one fraught with misunderstandings and conflicts. But as she looked out over the bustling courtyard, at the Vorta children playing alongside human youngsters, at the tentative smiles and gestures of friendship, she felt a flicker of hope. And then the sirens began to wail. In an instant, the shelter was a hive of activity. Human soldiers raced to their posts, their faces grim and determined. Administrator Boyd barked orders into his communicator, his voice tight with tension. And on the horizon, a dark shape grew larger and larger, until it dedication into a sleek, menacing ship of Ocampa design. Ilara felt a cold hand of dread clench around her heart. The nightmare wasn't over. It was only just beginning. The Ocampa ship loomed larger in the sky, its sleek, predatory form casting a shadow over the human settlement. Ilara's blood ran cold as she recognized the familiar contours of the vessel that had haunted her nightmares for months. "Administrator Boyd," she said, her voice tight with urgency. "That's an Ocampa warship. They found us." Boyd's face hardened as he turned to his communicator. "This is Administrator Boyd. All military personnel, report to your stations immediately. Initiate emergency protocol Sigma-9. The colony erupted into organized chaos. Sirens wailed and soldiers rushed to their posts, their boots pounding on the pavement. Civilians, both human and Vorta, emerged from their dwellings, fear etched on their faces. "We need to get everyone to safety," Boyd said, his eyes scanning the horizon. "The bunkers should hold." Ilara nodded, her mind racing. "The Ocampa won't stop until they've wiped us out. They have weapons that can vaporize entire city blocks." Boyd's heart made. "Then we'll need to hit them hard and fast. Lieutenant Wright." Marcus Wright appeared at Boyd's side, his face grim. "Sir?" "Oversee the civilian evacuation. Get everyone into the bunkers, no exceptions." As Wright hurried off, Boyd turned to Ilara. "We need a plan. You know these bastards better than anyone." Ilara's eyes narrowed as she considered their options. "We can't match them in firepower, but we might be able to use the terrain to our advantage. If we can draw them into the city proper, we could set up ambush points." Boyd nodded, a ghost of a smile on his face. "I like the way you think. Let's make it happen." As they worked out the details, Sergeant Alex Thompson approached, Zara at his side. The young Vorta's eyes were wide with fear, but there was a commitment in her stance that hadn't been there before. "Sir," Thompson said, saluting, "we've got a group of Vorta volunteers ready to assist in the defense. They're quick learners with our weapon systems." Boyd raised an eyebrow. "You're sure about this?" Zara stepped forward, her chin raised. "We've run from the Ocampa long enough. It's time we fought back." A series of explosions rocked the outskirts of the colony as the Ocampa ship touched down. Boyd's communicator crackled to life with reports of enemy troops disembarking. "All right," Boyd said, his voice steady. "Thompson, take your team and the Vorta volunteers. Set up a perimeter defense. Buy us as much time as you can." As Thompson and Zara hurried off, Boyd activated the colony-wide communication system. His voice echoed through the streets, calm and authoritative. "Attention all citizens of New Terra. This is Administrator Boyd. We are under attack by hostile forces. Please proceed to the nearest emergency bunker immediately. This is not a drill." Ilara watched as the last of the civilians were herded into the bunkers, the heavy doors sealing behind them with a resounding thud. In the distance, she could see the first flashes of weapons fire as Thompson's team engaged the Ocampa forces. Boyd emerged from the command center, his imposing frame now encased in a sleek, armored exoskeleton. He handed Ilara a plasma rifle, its weight unfamiliar but comforting in her hands. "Our defense systems will slow them down, but they won't hold forever," Boyd said, his voice distorted slightly by his helmet's speakers. "We need to take the fight to them." Ilara nodded, her grip tightening on the rifle. "To Cruel." As they made their way towards the front lines, the sounds of battle grew louder. The air crackled with energy discharges and the acrid smell of ozone. They passed pockets of resistance, human and Vorta fighters working in tandem, their combined efforts holding the Ocampa advance at bay. Rounding a corner, they came face to face with a squad of Ocampa warriors. Their alabaster skin gleamed in the sunlight, their eyes cold and merciless behind their energy shields. At their head stood a towering figure, his armor more ornate than the others. Krull. The Ocampa commander's lips curled into a sneer as he recognized Alara. So the little Vorta rat shows her face at last. Boyd raised his weapon, his exoskeleton's servos whirring. You've made a big mistake coming here, Krull. Krull's laughter was like shards of ice. Mistake? No, human. This is destiny, the eradication of the Vorta vermin and any who would harbor them. Energy crackled around them as both sides readied their weapons. The air grew thick with tension, the calm before the storm. And then, with a primal roar, the two forces clashed. The air erupted in a cacophony of plasma fire and energy discharges as both sides unleashed their arsenals. Boyd's exoskeleton whirred and clanked as he dove for cover, narrowly avoiding a searing bolt of energy from Krull's weapon. Alara rolled behind a fallen piece of debris, her heart pounding. She peeked out, squeezing off a few shots at the advancing Ocampa troops. Their energy shields flickered, but held. "We can't hold them like this," she shouted to Boyd over the din of battle. Boyd's voice crackled through his helmet speakers. "Agreed, we need to change tactics." He tapped his communicator. "All units, fall back to secondary positions. Initiate Operation Hammer and Anvil." As the human and Vorta defenders retreated in an orderly fashion, Boyd turned to Alara. "I need you to gather every able-bodied Vorta you can find. We're going to need all hands on deck for this." Alara nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. She sprinted through the chaotic streets, rallying her people. Many were scared, but the fire of defiance burned in their eyes. They had run for too long. It was time to fight. Meanwhile, Boyd coordinated with his military commanders. "Lieutenant Wright, it's time to unveil our ace in the hole. Get your team suited up in the mech units. We need to hit them hard and fast." Wright's voice came back tense but determined. "Roger that, sir. We're locked and loaded." As the Ocampa forces pressed their advantage, believing victory was at hand, a new sound filled the air. The ground trembled as 5 massive humanoid machines stomped into view. The experimental mech suits towered over the battlefield, their armor gleaming in the sun. Wright's voice boomed from the lead mech. "Let's even the odds, shall we?" The mechs opened fire, their concentrated barrage hammering against the Ocampa shields. Krull's eyes widened in shock as he saw his troops' defenses start to falter. "Impossible," he snarled. "All units, push forward, overwhelm them." But as the Ocampa charged, they found themselves caught in a deadly crossfire. Alara and her hastily assembled Vorta militia emerged from hidden positions, unleashing a barrage of suppressing fire. Their intimate knowledge of Ocampa tactics allowed them to predict and counter every move. In the midst of the chaos, Sergeant Thompson and Zara led a small team towards the grounded Ocampa ship. They moved swiftly and silently, planting explosive charges at key points along the vessel's hull. "That should do it," Thompson said, setting the final charge. "Let's move." As they retreated, the charges detonated in a spectacular series of explosions. The Ocampa ship's main weapons erupted in showers of sparks and twisted metal. Krull watched in horror as his technological advantage evaporated. "No!" he roared, his composure cracking. "All units, full assault! We end this now!" The Ocampa troops surged forward in a desperate charge, but they found themselves running into a gauntlet of traps and ambushes. Alara had positioned her forces perfectly, using the urban terrain to maximum effect. Zara darted through the battlefield like a vengeful spirit, her agility allowing her to close with Ocampa elites before they could react. One by one, she took them down, her face set in unshakable focus. The tide of battle had shifted. The combined human Vorta force was pushing the Ocampa back. Krull, seeing defeat looming, made an audacious attempt. He charged towards Boyd, his energy blade humming to life. "Surrender now," Krull hissed, holding the blade to Boyd's throat. "Or watch your people burn." Boyd's exoskeleton froze, its systems locked down. He raised his hand slowly. "Easy now," he said, his voice calm despite the danger. "Let's talk about this." As Cruel ranted about Ocampa's superiority, Boyd's fingers twitched, activating a hidden control in his suit. A high-pitched whine filled the air, drawing the attention of nearby Ocampa troops. In that moment of distraction, a plasma bolt struck Cruel's shoulder. The Ocampa commander stumbled back, his shield failing. Marcus Wright stood there, his mech's smoking weapon trained on Cruel. "Nice shot," Boyd said, his exoskeleton powering back up. Cruel, his face twisted in rage, reached for a device on his belt. "If I fall," he snarled, "you all fall with me." Ilara's eyes widened as she recognized the device. "No!" she shouted, sprinting towards Cruel. She tackled him just as he activated the bomb, the two of them disappearing in a blinding flash of light. The explosion rocked the battlefield, leaving a stunned silence in its wake. As the dust settled, the remaining Ocampa troops threw down their weapons, their will to fight evaporating with their leader's demise. In the skies above, the first ships of the human reinforcement fleet appeared, their weapons trained on the surrender. Remaining Ocampa troops, the battle was over. In the days that followed, the human colony of New Terra buzzed with activity. The smoking wreckage of the Ocampa ship loomed on the outskirts, a stark reminder of the recent conflict. Administrator Brian Boyd stood at the command center's view screen, surveying the damage reports scrolling past. "Sir," Lieutenant Wright's voice crackled through the intercom, "we've completed our initial sweep of the Ocampa vessel. You're going to want to see this." Minutes later, Boyd strode into the cavernous hull of the alien ship, his footsteps echoing off the twisted metal. Wright stood before a flickering holographic display, his face grim. "What am I looking at, Lieutenant?" Boyd asked, studying the complex schematics and star charts. Wright tapped a series of controls, zooming in on a particular sector. "This wasn't just a random attack, sir. It was a scouting mission. Look at these troop deployment plans, the resource allocation projections. They're gearing up for a full-scale invasion." Boyd's heart made. "How widespread?" "Multiple sectors, dozens of potential targets." Wright's voice was tight. "We got lucky this time, but if this is just the first wave, then we need to be ready for what comes next," Boyd finished. He activated his communicator. "This is Administrator Boyd. I need all department heads and Vorta representatives for an emergency meeting in 1 hour." As Boyd turned to leave, his gaze fell on a group of Vorta refugees, assisting human technicians in cataloging recovered Ocampa technology. Among them, he recognized the young female who had fought alongside Sergeant Thompson, Zara. "You there?" he called out. Zara looked up, her large eyes curious. "What's your name?" "Zara, sir," she replied, her voice steady. Boyd nodded. "I saw you during the battle. You've got skills we could use. How would you like to be part of something bigger?" An hour later, the command center was packed. Humans and Vorta stood side by side, an uneasy energy crackling between them. At the head of the table, Boyd laid out the situation in clear, concise terms. "The Ocampa threat is nowhere near the end," he concluded. "We need to pool our resources, our knowledge, if we're going to stand a chance." An elderly Vorta female, her silver hair elegantly coiled, spoke up. "I am Nara, elected spokesperson for my people. We are grateful for your protection, Administrator Boyd, but how can we be sure our interests will be protected in this alliance?" Boyd met her gaze. "That's exactly why I've called this meeting, Nara. We need to hammer out the foundations of true cooperation, equal partnership." As the discussions began in earnest, Boyd couldn't help but notice the young human diplomat, Logan Sheffield, deep in conversation with Zara. The two seemed oblivious to the tension around them, lost in their own world of cultural exchange. Outside the command center, a small crowd had gathered. Ian Huff, a maintenance worker with a chip on his shoulder, stood on an overturned crate, his voice rising above the murmur. "They're in there right now, giving away our hard-earned technology to these aliens," Huff shouted, his face red. "How long before they outnumber us? Take our jobs? Our homes?" A ripple of unease passed through the crowd. On the fringes, a group of Vorta youths watched with narrowed eyes, whispering among themselves. Back in the command center, the negotiations continued late into the night. Boyd rubbed his temples, feeling the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. The future of two peoples, perhaps entire sectors of space, rested on the decisions made here. As dawn broke over New Terra, casting long shadows across the scarred landscape, Boyd stood at the podium. Humans and Vorta alike gathered in the central plaza, tension thick in the air. "Citizens of New Terra," Boyd began, his voice carrying across the crowd. "Today marks a new chapter in our history. Together with our Vorta allies, we have agreed upon a framework for cooperation and mutual defense." He outlined the key points: joint training programs, shared technology development, and most importantly, equal legal status and rights for both humans and Vorta on New Terra. As the crowd erupted into a mixture of cheers and uneasy murmurs, Boyd caught sight of Huff at the edge of the gathering, his face twisted in disgust. On the other side, he noticed a group of older Vorta, led by one named Kriv, their expressions equally disapproving. Boyd's grip tightened on the podium. The real work, he knew, was just beginning. Uniting two disparate peoples against a common threat would be the greatest challenge of his career. As he looked out over the sea of faces, human and Vorta alike, he silently vowed to see it through, at any expense. In the weeks following the announcement of the Human-Vorta Alliance, New Terra buzzed with activity. Construction crews worked around the clock, converting existing structures into integrated living spaces in communal areas. The air filled with the sounds of hammering, welding, and the constant chatter of two species learning to coexist. Administrator Brian Boyd stood at the window of his office, watching the transformation unfold. He turned as the door slid open, revealing Nara, the Vorta elder. "Administrator," she said, her voice steady but tinged with concern, "I've come to discuss your latest proposal." Boyd nodded, gesturing for her to take a seat. "The Joint Governing Council and Unified Defense Corps. What are your thoughts?" Nara's large eyes studied him carefully. "It's ambitious, perhaps too ambitious for some. There are those among my people who fear losing our identity, our ways. And there are humans who share those fears," Boyd admitted, "but we can't afford to be divided, not with the threat we face." As they debated the finer points of integration, tension simmered elsewhere in the colony. In a dimly lit bar on the outskirts of the main settlement, Ian Huff hit his fist on the table. "They're taking everything from us," he snarled to the group of disgruntled humans around him. "Our jobs, our homes, and now our government." Across town in a Vorta cultural center, Kriv addressed his own followers. "This alliance is nothing more than slow extinction," he hissed. "We must preserve our purity, our lineage." The next day, Logan Sheffield and Zara walked hand in hand through the newly opened interspecies marketplace. The air was thick with exotic scents as human and Vorta vendors hawked their wares side by side. "Try this," Logan said, offering Zara a piece of fruit. She took a tentative bite, her eyes widening in surprise. "It's the sweet," she said, smiling. "Nothing like our food." Their moment of cultural exchange was shattered by a commotion nearby. A group of humans, faces twisted in anger, surrounded a Vorta family. "Go back to your own kind," one of the humans shouted, shoving the Vorta male. Logan stepped forward, putting himself between the groups. "That's enough," he said firmly. "We're all New Terrans now." The human sneered. "Vorta lover," he spat before the group slowly dispersed. As Logan and Zara helped the shaken Vorta family, neither noticed the figure watching from the shadows, his eyes filled with hate. Days later, Boyd stood before the newly formed Joint Council, his face grim. "The attacks are escalating," he reported. "Vandalism, assaults, and now this." He gestured to a holographic display showing the smoking ruins of the interspecies school. Nara's voice was heavy with sorrow. "Children, Administrator. They targeted children." Boyd nodded, his teeth clenched. "We have no choice. Lieutenant Wright?" Marcus Wright stepped forward, his military uniform crisp and imposing. "We've identified the leaders of both human and Vorta extremist groups. My teams are ready to move on your order." "Do it," Boyd said firmly. As Wright's soldiers stormed the hideouts of Huff and Kriv, Chaos erupted across the colony. Sirens wailed as emergency protocols were enacted. In the confusion, both radical leaders slipped through the net, disappearing into the underbelly of New Terra with their most devoted followers. Logan and Zara huddled in a safe house, their breaths coming in short gasps. They'd narrowly escaped an attack, the scorch marks on Logan's jacket a testament to how close it had been. A knock at the door made them both tense. Logan reached for his weapon, but relaxed as he recognized Wright's voice. "Sheffield, Zara," the lieutenant said as he entered. "We need you, both of you." Wright laid out his plan for an elite interspecies strike team. "You two understand both sides better than anyone," he explained. "We need that insight to bring down these insurgencies." Logan and Zara exchanged a long look. Finally, Zara nodded. "We're in," Logan said. As the strike team began its work, dismantling extremist cells one by one, Boyd faced a new challenge. The scientists studying the captured Ocampa technology had made a chilling discovery. "It's not just New Terra," the lead researcher explained, pointing to a star map filled with potential targets. "They're planning to hit multiple sectors. This was just the first wave." Boyd's mind raced. They needed an edge, and fast. He turned to the Vorta scientist working alongside the human team. "Your people's knowledge of Ocampa tech, combined with our engineers, could we reverse engineer their weapons, their defenses?" The Vorta's eyes widened at the implications. "It would be difficult, but yes, I believe we could." Boyd nodded, his decision made. "Make it happen. Whatever resources you need, you've got them." As New Terra geared up for the coming storm, the strike team closed in on their primary targets. Kriv fell first, captured in a daring raid on his hidden compound. Huff remained elusive, always one step ahead. In the wake of Kriv's capture, Boyd seized the moment. He addressed the colony, his voice carried to every corner of New Terra. "Humans, Vorta, citizens of New Terra," he began, his eyes burning with intensity. "We stand at a crossroads. Our differences, our fears, they're nothing compared to the threat we face. United, we have a chance. Divided, we fall." As Boyd's words echoed across the settlement, Nara sat in quiet contemplation. The time for caution had passed. She began to draft plans for a new hybrid society, one that would preserve the best of both cultures while forging something entirely new. In a small, secure chamber, the newly formed Joint Governing Council convened. Boyd looked around the table, seeing human and Vorta faces alike. "Our first order of business," he said, his voice solemn, "the nomination of new council members." He nodded to Nara. The Vorta elder stood, her bearing regal despite the weight of her years. "I nominate Zara," she said, her voice clear and strong. "She has shown us the power of unity, of what we can achieve together." A murmur ran through the chamber. Boyd allowed himself a small smile. It was a bold move, but one that could change everything. As the council debated, the future of New Terra hung in the balance. Outside, the sounds of construction continued, a symphony of two peoples building something greater than themselves. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with danger both from within and without. But for the first time since the Ocampa attack, there was hope. A new day was dawning on New Terra, and with it, the birth of the first truly unified human Vorta civilization. The ratification of New Terra's integration charter marked a turning point in the colony's history. Administrator Brian Boyd and Vorta elder Nara wasted no time in implementing their ambitious program to merge the two societies. In the newly christened Joint Operations Center, Lieutenant Marcus Wright surveyed a holographic display of New Terra's defenses. Human and Vorta officers worked side by side, their movements synchronized after months of rigorous training. "Status report," Wright barked. A young Vorta lieutenant, her silver hair tied back in a regulation bun, stepped forward. "Perimeter sensors are online, sir. The new hybrid shield matrix is operating at 98% efficiency." Wright nodded, allowing himself a small smile. The blending of human ingenuity and Vorta precision was already yielding results. Across the colony, the landscape was changing. Construction crews swarmed over newly designed buildings that melded the sweeping organic forms favored by the Vorta with the sturdy, functional aesthetics of human architecture. The skyline of New Terra was becoming a testament to the union of two cultures. In the council chambers, Zara sat at the circular table, her presence a symbol of the new era. The young Vorta's eyes were fixed on the holographic projection at the center, displaying the latest crisis to rock their fledgling civilization. The attack on Residential Hub 7 marks the third bombing this week, Boyd said, his voice tight with barely suppressed fury. Huff's group is escalating. Before anyone could respond, alarms blared throughout the chamber. A human aide burst in, face pale. "Sir, there's a situation at the Vorta Enclave. A mob—" Boyd was on his feet in an instant, Zara close behind. They rushed to the observation deck, where they could see smoke rising from the direction of the Vorta district. The sound of angry voices carried on the wind. "We need to get down there," Zara said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. Boyd nodded, already activating his comm unit. "Right, mobilize the peacekeepers. Non-lethal measures only." As they approached the scene in an armored transport, the full scale of the chaos became apparent. A sea of enraged humans pressed against the hastily erected barricades, their faces contorted with grief and anger. On the other side, Vorta civilians huddled in fear, some clutching makeshift weapons. Boyd's voice boomed through the loudspeakers. "Citizens of New Terra, stand down. This is not who we are." For a moment it seemed his words would be lost in the din. Then a familiar voice cut through the noise. "Please, listen!" Logan Sheffield stepped between the two groups, Zara at his side. "We've all lost loved ones, but this is exactly what Huff wants." Zara spoke next, her voice carrying a quiet strength. "We are not your enemy. We grieve with you. Let us face this threat together, as New Terrans." Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the tension began to ease. As peacekeepers moved in to establish order, Boyd saw humans and Vorta alike lowering their weapons, some even embracing in shared sorrow. In the days that followed, the hunt for Huff intensified. Wright's strike team, a perfect blend of human and Vorta operatives, combed through the underbelly of the colony. Their efforts paid off in a pre-dawn raid on a hidden bunker. Huff, disheveled and raving, was brought before the council. To everyone's surprise, it was Zara who spoke first. "We cannot answer hatred with more hatred," she said, her gaze steady on the captured terrorist. "I propose we offer rehabilitation, a chance for understanding." A murmur ran through the chamber. Boyd studied Zara, seeing in her the embodiment of the society they were striving to build. As the council debated Huff's fate, urgent news arrived from the science division. Dr. Elena Rossi, lead researcher on Ocampa technology, requested an immediate audience. "We've cracked their transmission codes," she announced, her excitement palpable. "The Ocampa Empire. It's vast, dozens of worlds, maybe more, and they're not stopping with New Terra." The implications hit Boyd like a physical blow. He turned to Nara, seeing his own unshakable focus mirrored in her alien features. "We need to accelerate our defense program," Nara said, voicing what they were all thinking. Boyd nodded. "Logan," he called, turning to the young diplomat, "I want you as my strategic advisor. Your understanding of both our peoples could be the key to our survival." As the meeting adjourned, Boyd stood at the window, watching the bustling activity of the colony below. Human children played alongside Vorta youth in a newly opened park. In the distance, the first joint educational campus rose, a beacon of their shared future. Yet even as hope blossomed, Boyd couldn't shake the weight of responsibility. Somewhere out there, the Ocampa were gathering their forces. The true test of New Terra's unity was yet to come. The council chamber erupted into a flurry of activity as Dr. Rossi's revelation sank in. Boyd's comm unit buzzed incessantly, urgent messages flooding in from every department. "Silence!" Boyd's voice cut through the chaos. He turned to Logan. "You're now my strategic advisor. I need a plan, and I need it fast." Logan nodded, his mind already racing. "We'll need to leverage our unique strengths, human ingenuity, Vorta biology, a hybrid approach." As if on cue, alarms blared throughout the colony. Wright's voice crackled over the comm system. "Long-range sensors have detected multiple Ocampa vessels entering the system. ETA, 72 hours. Boyd's face hardened. Initiate Omega contingency. The word sent a ripple through the room. Nara stepped forward, her eyes meeting Boyd's. Are you certain, Administrator? Once begun... We have no choice, Boyd said firmly. Within hours, New Terra transformed. Factories switched to round-the-clock production of weapons and defensive systems. Scientists worked feverishly, merging human and Vorta technologies into hybrid creations never before seen. Logan pored over tactical displays, his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. Here, he pointed to a holographic representation of New Terra's orbit. We'll deploy swarms of ECM drones. They'll confuse and disorient the Ocampa fleet. Wright nodded approvingly. And for close-quarters combat? Vorta shock troops, Logan replied, enhanced with bio-augmentations. They'll strike hard and fast, then vanish before the Ocampa can regroup. In the streets, recruitment centers overflowed. Humans and Vorta alike queued for hours, eager to defend their new home. Zara addressed the crowds, her voice carrying over the din. We stand united, she called out. Human and Vorta as one people, New Terra will not fall. As the first orbital defense platforms took shape, Boyd toured the industrial complexes. In one vast hangar, he found Aliyah Darjan, a young Vorta prodigy, hunched over a complex array of machinery. Administrator, she greeted him, barely looking up from her work. The new plasma cannons are nearly ready for testing. Boyd nodded approvingly. Good work, Aliyah. How soon can we have them deployed? 48 hours if we push the fabricators to their limits. Do it, Boyd ordered. In the training grounds, Wright drilled the newly formed hybrid units relentlessly. Human soldiers marveled at their Vorta comrades' speed and agility, while Vorta warriors adopted human tactical innovations with startling speed. As the deadline approached, Logan and Zara found a moment of respite atop an observation tower. They gazed out at the colony, now filled with defenses. Do you think it'll be enough? Zara asked softly. Logan squeezed her hand. It has to be. The distant sky flickered with the telltale signs of ships dropping out of hyperspace. New Terra's sensors lit up like a Christmas tree, tracking hundreds, then thousands of Ocampa vessels. In the command center, Boyd's voice rang out clear and strong. All units, this is Administrator Boyd. The enemy is at our doorstep. Remember your training, trust in each other, and fight not just for yourselves, but for the future we've built together. New Terra stands ready. Engage Defense Protocol Alpha 1. As the first Ocampa ships entered weapons range, New Terra's defenses roared to life. The battle for humanity's first extrasolar colony had begun. The sky above New Terra erupted in a dazzling display of fire and light as the Ocampa Armada descended upon the colony. Boyd's voice barely finished echoing through the command center when the first salvo of enemy fire slammed into the orbital defenses. Shields holding at 87%, reported a Vorta technician, her fingers dancing across the holographic interface. Boyd nodded grimly. Return fire, all batteries. The colony's hypervelocity cannons roared to life, their massive projectiles streaking towards the incoming Ocampa ships. Explosions blossomed in the vacuum of space as the two forces clashed. In the Tactical Operations Center, Lieutenant Wright coordinated the counteroffensive. Launch drone squadrons Alpha through Delta, he ordered. Vorta strike teams, prepare for deployment on my mark. The battlefield quickly devolved into chaos as human-made drones swarmed the Ocampa fleet, drawing their fire and creating openings for the Vorta warriors. Zara led one such team, her silver hair a blur as she piloted her craft through the maelstrom. Target acquired, she reported, her voice calm despite the danger. Initiating strike run. Zara's team swooped in, unleashing a barrage of bioplasma torpedoes that tore through the Ocampa ship's hull. Before the enemy could respond, they vanished back into the fray. On the ground, Logan oversaw the deployment of autonomous weapon grids. Redirect fire to Sector 7, he commanded, his eyes fixed on the holographic battlefield. We need to keep their landing forces fragmented. The Ocampa fleet, accustomed to straightforward engagements, struggled to adapt to the hit-and-run tactics. Their formations began to break apart as they chased phantom targets and fell victim to ambushes. In the command bunker, Boyd received an urgent transmission from Dr. Rossi. Administrator, the nano-sabotage teams are in position, awaiting your go-ahead. Boyd took a deep breath. Execute! Across the battlefield, Ocampa ships began to malfunction as microscopic infiltrators wreaked havoc on their systems. Thrusters failed, weapons misfired, and command systems crashed. As the tide of battle shifted, Boyd saw his opportunity. Prepare the thermonuclear charges, he ordered. We'll only get one shot at this. The carefully timed detonations ripped through the heart of the Ocampa fleet, creating a momentary gap in their lines. Wright seized the moment, leading a daring assault that drove straight for the enemy flagship. Zara's voice crackled over the comm. This is it, she said, her tone resolute. For New Terra. Her corvette, battered but still flying, accelerated towards the Ocampa command ship. The last thing Boyd saw on the tactical display was a brilliant flash as Zara's vessel impacted the flagship's bridge. In the stunned silence that followed, Boyd stood tall. Broadcast on all frequencies, he commanded. To the Ocampa fleet, your commander is dead, your ships are crippled. Surrender now or face total annihilation. For a tense moment, there was no response. Then, one by one, Ocampa vessels began powering down their weapons. The invasion had been repelled. As the realization of victory spread, cheers erupted throughout New Terra. But in the command center, Boyd, Logan, and Nara exchanged knowing glances. This battle was won, but the war with the Ocampa Empire had only just begun. The echoes of victory still reverberated through New Terra's corridors when Logan Sheffield burst into the command center, his face ashen. Administrator Boyd, we need to talk. Now. Boyd's celebratory smile faded as he took in Logan's grim expression. He nodded, gesturing to a private alcove. What is it? Logan's voice was low, urgent. The Ocampa transmissions we intercepted. This wasn't their main force. It was just a scouting party. Boyd's blood ran cold. How bad? Worse than we could have imagined. They're mobilizing on a scale we've never seen. Dozens of subjugated worlds, entire quadrants being systematically cleared. Within minutes, the surviving council members were gathered. The mood shifted from elation to dread as Logan laid out the dire intel. Nara's eyes blazed with fierce grit. We must strike first. Hit them before they can consolidate their forces. Zara nodded in agreement. A preemptive attack is our only chance. We can't let them reach New Terra. Boyd shook his head. And risk everything we've built? We should evacuate while we still can. Find a new home beyond their reach. The debate raged, voices rising in passion and fear. Logan stood silent, the weight of the decision crushing down on him. All eyes turned to him, waiting. He took a deep breath. We do both. We launch an all-out offensive to cripple their invasion force, buying time for a civilian evacuation through an experimental transwarp conduit. The plan was audacious, borderline suicidal, but it was their only hope. New Terra transformed into a frenzy of activity. Factories churned out weapons and ships around the clock. The transwarp conduit took shape, a towering marvel of desperation and ingenuity. In the midst of the chaos, Zara found Logan atop an observation tower. They stood in silence, watching the bustle below. I'm leading the vanguard, Zara said softly. Logan's grip on the railing tightened. I know. They embraced, words failing in the face of what lay ahead. As the deadline approached, Boyd made his final rounds. He found Nara in the command center, poring over tactical displays. This isn't goodbye, she said, not looking up. Boyd smiled sadly. Of course not. The first Ocampa ships appeared on long-range sensors. New Terra's defenses roared to life, a hellish barrage lighting up the sky. Wright's voice crackled over the comms. Vanguard, deploy! Zara's corvette streaked towards the enemy armada, leading the charge. Logan watched from the command center, his heart in his throat. The battle unfolded with brutal intensity. Ocampa ships fell by the dozens, but more kept coming. New Terra's defenders fought with desperate valor, knowing each moment bought was another life saved. Zara's voice, calm despite the chaos, Target acquired. Initiating final run. Logan's eyes widened in horror as he realized her intent. Zara, no! The comm went dead as her ship plunged into the heart of the Ocampa fleet. The resulting explosion tore a hole in their formation, but the price was beyond measure. As the civilian transport streamed towards the awaiting conduit, the tactical grid erupted in warnings. Something was wrong. Energy spike, a technician shouted. The conduit's destabilizing. Boyd's voice cut through the panic. Evacuate now! All ships, go! The last transports vanished into the swirling vortex as New Terra shuddered under the Ocampa onslaught. In the command bunker, Logan met Boyd's eyes one final time before the world went white. When the blinding flash faded, New Terra was a smoldering ruin. The conduit had collapsed, its final destination unknown. Silence reigned over the battlefield, broken only by the ghostly whispers of data streams, echoes of those who had given everything in defense of their home. In the vast emptiness of space, a single transmission pulsed outward, carrying with it the hope of New Terra's survivors. Its destination, unknown. Its message, unbreakable.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.